Ezekiel 33:3.
Hello everyone and happy Sabbath. Today we'll be taking a look at Leviticus and the dietary laws recorded in Leviticus. You might be familiar with the idea of clean and unclean. It gets addressed in the book of Leviticus. It comes up actually first in the book of Exodus when all the animals were going onto the boat. I always say the boat, everyone was going onto the ark. We saw the animals going up in pairs, and then the unclean animals, there was less unclean animals than there were clean animals. We're going to look at the terminology clean and unclean. We'll also take a look at what exactly is the scientific reason for clean and unclean, not just the biblical reason. And then after that, we'll segue a little bit, and we're going to take a look into some very apostate ministries. And then we'll finish off with a personal experience that I had in, I wouldn't call it an apostate ministry, but it's definitely a problem that needs to be addressed. So we'll look at Leviticus 1:1. The word Leviticus, you can actually get it from the very first verse in Leviticus. It comes from the word Vayikra in Hebrew, which means to call, proclaim, or to read. So when you're saying the book of Leviticus, what you're actually saying is, and he called. And when you're talking about and he called, what's that referring to? He called a priesthood. So Leviticus is where you start to see the Levites. You see in the word Leviticus, the word Levi. Levi are the Levites. That's Moses and Aaron, who was the high priest. So, and he called was referring to the priest that he called to do the priestly service for him in the temple, and he being God. So we got the word Leviticus. The English word of Leviticus is derived from the Greek version of the word of the book, and it means matters pertaining to the Levites. So Leviticus means matters pertaining to the Levites, and Vayikra means and he called, meaning the priesthood. So in Leviticus 11:1-8, we see a breakdown of different types of animals, and they're looked at as clean and unclean, and there's rules for how you discern between them. So it starts off with the field animals. It says, the Lord spoke again to Moses and Aaron, telling them, say to the Israelites, of all the beasts of the earth, these ones you may eat. You may eat any that has a split hoof, completely divided, and chews the cud. I wasn't quite sure when I was reading this a long time ago what chewing the cud was all about. Chewing the cud is basically like an animal like a cow. For example, it chews some food in its mouth, and it keeps chewing it because a lot of the processing of that food happens in the mouth. It's the same with humans, but more so with a cow. We kind of chew our food much too quickly. You'll see a cow in the field that chews quite a bit. It's chewing cud in its mouth, and then it finally swallows it, and then it has multiple digestive systems to actually break it down. It goes on and says, but of those that only chew the cud or only have a divided hoof, you are not to eat the following. The camel, though it chews the cud, it does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean for you. So there's two things that need to be met here. Condition 1 has to chew the cud if it's a field animal. Condition 2, it has to have a divided hoof. So the camel in this instance, we see it does chew the cud like a cow does, but it does not have a divided hoof. So we can see it's unclean. The rock badger, though it chews the cud, it does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean for you. We'll discuss what unclean means in just a bit. We're just going to do some identification first. The rabbit, though it chews the cud, it does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean for you. That might be surprising because I know a lot of people have had rabbit in their life. And the pig, though it has a split hoof completely divided, does not chew the cud, it is unclean for you. So the pig is the inverse. The pig does have a split hoof, but it does not chew the cud. You must not eat their meat or touch their carcasses. They are unclean for you. Leviticus 11:27-28, it talks about four-footed animals with paws. And all the four-footed animals that walk on their paws are unclean for you. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean until evening. And anyone who picks up a carcass must wash their clothes or wash his clothes, and he will be unclean until the evening. They are unclean for you. So they're pretty easy to discern between. Anything that walks on fours with paws, they're just a no-no. So a leopard, a dog, a cat, no. Leviticus, then we look at birds. So Leviticus 11:13-19. Additionally, you are to detest the following birds, and they must not be eaten because they are detestable. The eagle, the bearded vulture, the black vulture, the kite or any kind of falcon, any kind of raven, the ostrich, the screech owl, the gull, any kind of hawk, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the stork, any kind of heron, this one I'm not familiar with, the hopu, and the bat. So all these animals that are listed here A lot of them, if you look very carefully, you'll notice that some of them, not all of them, but some of them are birds of prey. You'll find that all the birds of prey are animals that you can't eat. Leviticus 11:9-12, fish. Of all the creatures that live in the water, whether in the stars or in the streams, you may eat anything with fins and scales. But the following among all the teeming life and creatures in the water are detestable to you. Everything in the seas or streams that does not have fins and scales, they are an abomination to you. You must not eat their meat, and you must detest their carcass. Everything in the water that does not have fins and scales shall be detestable to you. So, for example, an eel does not have scales. So the animals with fins and scales, they're fine. Any fish, any aquatic life in the water that does not have fins and scales, they're an abomination. So they're unclean, and we'll figure out the reason why shortly. Insects. So you can eat some insects. 11:20-23 of Leviticus. All flying insects that walk on all fours are detestable to you. However, you may eat the following kinds of winged creatures that walk on all floors. Those having jointed legs above their feet for hopping on the ground. Of these you may eat any kind of locust, katydid, cricket, or grasshopper. All other winged creatures that have 4 legs are detestable to you. So if you take a look, the jointed legs that we're talking about, you can see on the right-hand image here, they kind of have a leg that's more separated. If you look at, for example, a fly doesn't have this kind of a breakdown. You also find that if you look at a grasshopper versus a fly will eat manure, whereas a grasshopper, it's a herbivore, it eats grass. You'll find that a lot of the insects that are carnivores or that don't eat grass, they'll have these different types of legs. And so, of course, what you're eating is that garbage that's inside of them. Leviticus 11:20-31, crawling creatures. The following creatures that move along the ground are unclean for you: the mole, the mouse, any kind of great lizard, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the common lizard, the skink, and the chameleon. These animals are unclean for you among the crawling creatures. Lizards, for example, one of the reasons you can guess why they wouldn't be good to eat is they don't sweat. And so, of course, they hold more toxins in their skin. When human beings sweat or other animals sweat, out of their pores when they sweat, they're also releasing toxins. Since these animals don't sweat, they're more prone to having toxins kept within their skin. So that's one reason why the meat would be more of a carcinogen. So here's the question. We've seen the Bible say that they're unclean. Don't eat them. They're an abomination. But why? Why did God label some animals as clean and others as unclean? We don't have time to go through every single one of them, but we will go through quite a bit of them to figure out the reason why. And if you look into these different animals and what makes them different in regards to how they digest food or just different attributes about them, you'll find out the reason why they're toxic. We'll actually verify why they're toxic, and we'll go through a bunch of them. And the other ones where we don't actually talk about why they're more toxic, you can always take a look at some of their attributes later. So this is from 1953, an experimental pharmacological appreciation of Leviticus. So this was actually a test that they did back in the 50s because people want to understand, why did God say some animals were clean and some were unclean? This is actually on the NIH's website. So it is a government website. This is Anthony Fauci's ballpark here. He'd be very familiar with this. But this was basically, like I said, to find out why some animals were listed as clean and others unclean. And so they did a bunch of tests and they tried to figure out why the meat of the animal was considered not good for human beings to consume. This test was based on something called phytotoxicity. Phytotoxic means poisonous to plants. So phytotoxicity is a toxic effect by a compound on plant growth, such as damage may be caused by a wide variety of compounds, including trace metals, salinity, pesticides, phytotoxins, or allelochemicals. So basically what they're doing here is they're using plants and the growth of plants to determine whether or not something is toxic, because if a plant doesn't grow to its full capability, then they know that obviously there's something that interacted with the plant that killed it. Phytotoxicity. The experiment took plant seeds and mixed them with different types of animal proteins to see how they would affect the growth of the plants. The plant growth was measured, and the plants that scored 76% and up, they're good to the human body. 75% and less, destructive and poisonous to the human body. So these foods won't necessarily kill you as dead as a hammer in a day, But over the span of your life, as you continue to eat them, they will actually lead to things like pestilence and disease. So if you stay above that 76 range with the foods that you eat, you don't have to worry about cellular mutation. Like, I mean, you could still possibly get cancers and other methods, but at least you wouldn't have to worry about getting a cancer or some kind of a virus infection from the idea of eating something that was at least phytotoxic. It says, in studying muscle extracts of fresh meats from various species of animals, some very interesting findings were made. These are exhibited in subjoined tables. To understand the significance of the tables, one must bear in mind that the phytotoxic index means the ratio in percentages of root growth of Lupinus albus seedlings in a solution of unknown muscle juice dissolved in plant physiological saline to the growth of seedlings from exactly the same crop of plants grown in normal control solutions at exactly the same conditions. The lower the index, the more poisonous is the effect. The unexamination of the figures reveals data which are of considerable interest not only to the medical investigator, but also to students of ancient biblical literature. It was found that muscle juices and saline extracts of skeletal muscles or meats from such domestic animals as ox, calf, sheep, goat, and deer commonly employed as food were practically non-toxic. And it goes on. So basically what the study was they took meat juice and they added meat juice to a plant seedling and they watched that plant grow. If the plant didn't grow to its full amount, they gave it a percentage of how far did it grow. So if the plant grew to 80% of what it was supposed to, that was above their number of 76. They said that's safe to eat. When they found that it was below 75, they said that is not safe to eat. And that had to do with how damaged the plant was. Similar experiments with extracts of muscles from other quadrupeds, mostly wild ones, and beasts of prey were also found to be phytotoxic. Specimens of fresh or frozen fish were secured from the dog, cat, squirrel, white rat, groundhog, fox, opossum, hamster, black bear, and grizzly bear, and rhinoceros. Other experiments were made in exactly the same way with muscle extracts from various birds. Here again, it was found that the extracts from the flesh of the chicken, the duck, the goose, the turkey, the pigeon, the quail were not toxic, while similar extracts from the flesh of birds of prey, for example, the owl, the hawk, the falcon, and the crow, were quite toxic. Growth of Lupinus albus seedlings. Such fishes were catfish, eel, moonfish, puffer, skate, sharks, stingray, toadfish, and porcupine fish. Similarly, studies on 1% solutions of blood from a number of fishes were found to give a similar difference in toxicity. The blood from fishes with scales and fins was but slightly inhibitory to the root of the growth of the seedlings, while the blood specimens obtained from a number of fishes without scales or fins were highly toxic. So we can see right here, this is their conclusions, but they're saying what they found was the fish that had both fins and scales, they didn't really do anything to stop plant growth whatsoever. But the animals or the fish that had no scales or fins were highly toxic and destroying the plants.
Many believe that clean and unclean does not apply to our time anymore because, according to some philosophies, Jesus declared all things clean, so we are no longer under these prohibitions. Some believe that this is only a purely Jewish concept. Now, there's an interesting experiment that was made. They took some mussel extract and made an extract and put this onto seeds and determined how these seeds were affected by the mussel extract. And so they went through the list of the animals listed in the book of Leviticus and discovered that when unclean animals were used, then the extract had an effect on the growth of these plants. So here we have the effect of a 2% mussel extract from various animals used as a growth medium for seedlings of Lupinus albus on root growth compared to seedlings grown in a standard growth media. And the results are expressed as a phytotoxic index, where 100% indicates no impairment of growth. So they planted these little legumes and then in a growth medium measured their normal growth and normal growth was 100%. They added the extract. If the extract impaired the growth, well, then it was less than 100%. So the closer we get to 100%, the better the growth and the less the impairment.
So here's an example of the quadrupeds. So here we can see in table 1, they used ox, calf, sheep, goat, deer, swine, rabbit, guinea pig, camel, and horse. If we look at an ox, for example, so the plant grew to 91% of its growth. Is the ox okay to eat? Absolutely. Is this one of the animals in the book of Leviticus that gets a thumbs up? Absolutely. Choose the cud, split hoof. We can see the calf. Calf also, choose the cud, split hoof, 82%. What about sheep? Sheep is one of the highest. Sheep is one of the healthiest things you can eat in regards to meat. Has a very low phytotoxicity as it's 94%. The plants reach 94% of their growth. Goats, also quite good, 90%. And again, these are animals that chew the cud and they have a split foot. Deer, 90%. Then we get to the swine, the pig, 54%. It's actually one of the lowest. Rabbits, a little bit lower. Now, rabbits are interesting because when I studied rabbits, I found that they actually eat their own fecal matter. They have a digestive system where they have to eat their food twice. So the first pellet that they actually release is a very soft pellet, and then they eat it again to grab more nutrients from it, and then comes out a harder pellet. And so rabbits, since they're digesting their own excrement, what ends up happening is the meat is very phytotoxic. And the swine, for other reasons, it's the environment that it lives in. The swine also eats its own fecal matter, but it's less phytotoxic than the rabbit is. Swine also don't sweat. You'll find that animals that don't sweat, that's another reason why their meat is extremely toxic. Guinea pig, 46%. Camel, which we discussed, camel is actually listed in the book of Leviticus. It's 41%. It's actually one of the worst. But it's really interesting is the fact that one of the major world religions, one of the Abrahamic religions, is Islam. And Islam does follow the Old Testament because they're sons of Abraham. They're the sons of Ishmael, but they still eat camel. And you can see here that if they didn't, they wouldn't be running into this problem of phytotoxicity, as the camel is one of the most, if not most, the horses, but it's one of the most toxic animals on this chart. Horse meat is the worst. I'm not quite sure why. I haven't studied the horse enough, but I know it has something to do specifically with this digestive system. So if you want to understand why the horse is so toxic, it has to do specifically with the digestive system of the horse. I've seen some videos on it. I just don't remember the details. Field animals. So the Lord spoke again to Moses, telling them, say to the Israelites, of all the beasts of the earth, these are the ones you may eat. You may eat any animal that has a split hoof, completely divided, that chews the cud. So assuming you didn't have this chart that we just looked at, if you just followed exactly what this said, you'd be fine. Because if you notice, you can see here the camel, the rabbit, and the pig, they're listed here by name, and they all have a very low phytotoxicity or very high phytotoxicity. In other words, the plant didn't grow to its full maturity. So that means if it's damaging the plant, it's also damaging your human body. We'll take a look over here and we can see now these are the animals that walk on all fours with paws. We have dogs, cats, squirrels, rats, groundhog, fox, opossum, hamster, black bear, grizzly bear. Dog, 62%. In Asia, they do eat dogs. However, it's below that 75% mark, so this is highly toxic. That means the plant is just basically growing over 50% of its height, meaning that it's quite damaging. Cat is even worse. I know that if you have a pregnant woman, you're supposed to stay away from litter boxes as the bacteria that's in their fecal matter is quite dangerous. Squirrels, 43. Rats, 55%. Rats shouldn't be that surprising. I was surprised to see the squirrel was actually under the rat though. But again, it could have something to do with its digestive system. If you want to know more about specific animals, just go to a zoo, maybe ask a zoologist and ask them things about how the animals digest their food. That might put a pretty good explanation as to why they'd be so toxic. It's either sweating, it could be the fact they eat their excrement, it could be the fact that they digest their food in a strange way like the rabbit. Black bear, this is kind of interesting. I looked at black bear and noticed a black bear is 59% and a grizzly bear is 55%. The reason why this is interesting is because grizzly bears, for example, they eat rotten meat. They're scavengers. So it's not a good idea to eat bear meat. I knew this long before I saw this chart, because a grizzly bear will typically kill something, let the food rot for a bit, and then come back and eat it. So a grizzly bear would make sense why the meat wouldn't be very good, because if grizzly bears are consuming a combination of things, but including rotten meat, that would explain the phytotoxicity. We also have rhinoceros here. Rhinoceros is at 60%. So you'd be better off eating a rhino than you'd be eating a black bear. Four-footed with paws. All the four-footed animals that walk on their paws are unclean for you. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean until evening. Whoever picks up their carcass must wash their clothes, and he will be unclean until evening. They are unclean for you. Again, if people follow this just blindly, scientifically, it supports they would be totally okay, at least with their diet, because these animals are doing damage to their body. It's not going to be a one-off. Remember, it's accumulative. And cumulatively, these things cause things like different diseases in human beings, and this can also lead to cancers. Now we're taking a look at different types of birds. So we've got chickens. Chickens are at 83%. So chickens are quite healthy, but duck is even better. Duck is 90%. A goose is 85%. You can eat goose, geese. They're better than chickens. Turkey. Turkey is 85%. Pigeon, interestingly, which surprised me, 93%. You can eat pigeons. They're actually not bad for you at all. Quail, 89%. Canada goose, 85%. Now we start to look at this end of the chart where it starts to look at birds of prey. The sparrowhawk, 63%. Red-tailed hawk, ooh, don't touch that one, 36%. The owl, 62%. I believe that owls eat their excrement as well. They leave these big pellets behind. Crow, 46%. Coot, 88%. This one isn't so bad, but it probably isn't a bird of prey. Wild duck, 85%, and swan, 87%. I've never really seen anyone eat a swan. I haven't heard of it either, but apparently you could. Leviticus 11:13-19, birds. So here's the description of birds. And when we look at the chart and we compare this, we can see how it works. Additionally, you are to detest the following birds, and they must not be eaten because they are detestable. The eagle, the bearded vulture, the black vulture. Vultures are scavengers, so that's self-explanatory. The eagle, bird of prey. The kite, any kind of falcon, any kind of raven. Ostrich, I know people eat ostrich. The screech owl, the gull, any kind of hawk. The little owl, the cormorant, the great owl. The white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the stork, any kind of heron, hopi, and the bat. It's funny because coronavirus was supposed to be started from a bat. So now we take a look at fish, and there's quite a bit of examples here. So when we look at some of these, I will not be able to tell you all of them which have scales and which don't have scales, but you can trust that if you actually Google these and take a look at images of them, some of them will have fine scales, but fine scales still count as scales. So I'll name a couple that stand out. Black bass, 80. Black drum, also 80. The bluefish scored over 105. So that means that the plant actually grew higher with the bluefish. It must be, oh, did I get that right? I'm making sure I got my eyes lined here. No, black drum. It was the black drum. Black drum is 105. I'm not sure what kind of fish that is. I've never had it in my life. That means that the plant actually grew in excess of 100%. And there were some fish that actually provided some kind of a protein from their flesh that made the plant grow more. So I would say that if you really want to be safe with your diet and you want to eat meat, you're not a vegan, for example, some of these fish would be great because it doesn't just do damage, it actually improves your health. Let's see what else stands out here. Bowfin is 90. I'm not familiar with that one either. Butterfish. These are all fish with scales. Catfish. Catfish does not have scales. It's a kind of a flat fish. It's 48. Chub, 91. I had that one growing up. Cod, 90. Eel. I know the eel does not have scales. 40. Let's keep going down here. I'm just looking for some common ones. Haddock. Haddock is 80. Goldfish. I can definitely see scales on a goldfish. 88. Halibut. 82. Herring. 100. Pike. 98. I'm going to switch to the other chart now. Porcupine fish. I don't believe this has scales. I think that's a spiny kind of looking fish. I mean, the name sort of implies it. 60. Pufferfish, that's definitely one without scales, 51. So you can see that these charts do correlate exactly with Leviticus, and it wasn't until the 50s that they were able to quantify this. No one ever bothered. But if people just blindly followed in the past and followed these rules that the Jews were providing through their old texts, people would have had better health. A lot of cultures obviously have never heard of this. They clearly don't follow these things. But scientifically, you can see that the Jews were obviously onto something by maintaining a diet that followed these rules. It wasn't just arbitrary rules for no reason. Scientifically, we can see there's a very good reason. Here we see kingfish. Kingfish is 70, so that's a little bit below our 75 number. Flounder, 75, so kind of right on the mark, not great. Hammerhead shark, that one interested me. Now that's a carnivore, so that might be part of the reason. I mean, a lot of these fish, you'll see them eating algae. So a fish that eats algae versus a fish that eats other fish, that kind of looks like a bird of prey, right? 34 for the hammerhead shark. Sand shark, 31. So it looks like the fish that eat other fish, that could explain why they're not so good for you. It's funny because in the book of Genesis, it said that every plant-bearing seed and tree were to be for food, and that was for Adam and Eve. And then later after the flood, the diet changed, but then came the Leviticus dietary laws. So if you are going to eat meat, the idea is that you stay within these recommendations, otherwise you're destroying your own health. We've got the eel again. Eel is 50, catfish 59, stingray 55. So again, for the fish, Leviticus 11:9-12, of all the creatures that live in the water, whether in the seas or in the streams, you may eat anything with fins and scales. But the following among all the teeming life and creatures in the water are detestable to you. Everything in the seas or streams that does not have fins and scales, they shall be an abomination to you. So some people ask me, they say, well, what about a crab? What about a lobster? What about shrimp? They don't have fins or scales. Exactly. We're not supposed to be eating them. They're kind of like the trash collectors of the sea. They go on the bottom of the seafloor and then they eat the garbage of the sea. And then, of course, when you consume them, you take in the toxins. I know a lobster, for example, you can't eat the head of the lobster because that's where all the toxins are. So it goes to show you they do accumulate a large amount of toxins in their body. Crabs, it's a little bit more spread out. It says, they shall be an abomination to you. You must not eat their meat, and you must detest their carcasses. Everything in the water, it says everything in the water that does not have fins and scales shall be detestable to you. So if you look at Islamic laws, you'll see the forbidding of the eating of pork. And the method of slaughter is similar to that practiced by the Jews. In many societies, the eating of pork was prohibited. So it's not just Islam, it's not just Judaism. There are many other societies that don't eat pork. The Navajos and the Yukuts of northern Turkey, as well as the Laplanders, had prohibitions on eating pork. And of course, when we looked at pork, we'll go back to that in a second. We'll look at its phytotoxin index. Iranians were not allowed to eat fish that did not have both fins and scales. Iranians are obviously not followers of Judaism or the Bible. They had their own religion. I mean, one of them was Zoroastrianism, but they knew not to eat the fish without fins and scales. Also, the inhabitants of the South Pacific will not eat eel. Similar laws to the Levitical code existed among the ancient Hindus and the code of Manu. Manu was the Hindu equivalent of Noah. It forbade the eating of all carnivorous birds and all animals that did not have a cloven hoof. So these ideas were not just distinct to the Jews. Obviously, there were other cultures that come to learn that these animals are poisonous. Pig transplants should be banned. New scientist. America's health officials are under attack for allowing animal organs to be transplanted into humans, despite mounting evidence that they may bring viruses to them. The criticism comes after two teams of researchers found that pigs, the most promising source of organs for transplant, carry a virus that can affect human cells. Although researchers have told U.S. Food and Drug Administration of their concerns, the FDA continues to allow transplants to take place. In the current issue of Nature Medicine, Volume 3, page 282, Robin Weiss and his colleagues at the Institute of Cancer Research in London show that a retrovirus, the group of viruses that include HIV, infects human cells in the lab. Because the virus is incorporated into the pig's DNA, it cannot be removed except by selecting genetic variants of pigs that lack the virus and breeding them to create a virus-free strain. So in this example here, we can see back in March of 1997, the FDA did not listen to the doctors. If we take a look here, let's compare something. If we look at the swine, the pig, we saw that it has a phytotoxicity of 54%, well beneath the 75. And if we take a look at the black bear or the grizzly bear is 55. You might as well eat grizzly bear meat because grizzly bear meat is actually better for you than swine meat is. And grizzly bears eat rotten meat.
Now, the pig is considered unclean in many, many societies. And there's probably a good reason why this creature is unclean. If we go through the list of the creatures that are listed as clean in the Bible, we will see that they are all herbivores. All of them are herbivores. They, in other words, feed at the lowest level of the trophic aspects of the ecosystem. What's also fascinating is although some of them are herbivores, some of them are unclean. And that is when the anatomy is as we described in the case of the hare and otherwise, where they have to change their habits in order to gain enough nutrition out of what they eat. Now the pig is omnivore. It eats anything. It will scavenge, it will eat plant material, it will eat animal material. And we know that there is a process called biological magnification. The further you go away from the lowest feeding levels, the plant base, the more toxin is added to the tissues. So on the basis of that alone, this creature would qualify as unclean. A pig, of course, is also known for many other diseases, parasitic and otherwise. Much of the parasite problem can be solved with the right medication, but there are other problems associated with pigs. Here is a snippet from one of the scientific magazines. Off the menu from early warnings that chickens were laying fewer eggs, the dioxin scandal grew to engulf Belgium's meat industry with a full ban on all poultry, beef and pork products. Here you have this question of biological accumulation of toxins, and the pig, of course, is one that qualifies in this regard. Then you have some strange diseases, viral diseases, which tend to be very prevalent in pigs. Now it's interesting that in the past, the pig was one of the nurturing chambers for viral change, so that a species barrier could be crossed from animals to man. And the pig was always considered as one of these viral chambers where these changes could take place. Burying the bacon, encephalitis diseases passing from the pig directly to the human. There are many, many reasons why pig should be considered unclean, scientifically speaking. Did human error spread a virus from pigs? Japanese encephalitis, a deadly disease, is spreading amongst farmers. So viruses jumping the species barrier often take a transitional phase in the pig. Pig transplants should be banned from hospitals. They use hot valves, etc. in the pigs. So again, the viral issue is of great importance. So God says, leave these creatures alone and you will have fewer problems. Skin and joint disorders, boils, hives, psoriasis, gout, many of these issues are often associated with the eating of many or high quantities of these creatures.
I will set my face against any Israelite or any foreigner residing among you who eats blood, and I will cut them off from the people. Any Israelite or foreigner residing amongst you who hunts any animal or bird that may be eaten must drain out the blood. This actually comes up quite a bit in Leviticus. It also comes up in the book of Jasher. It was a really big deal for the Israelites to consume any kind of blood. So while they were allowed to eat meat after the flood, this is when the laws was made, when the agreement was made with Noah. It was a new covenant. Under that new covenant, he and his sons were allowed to eat meat, but they were warned many, many, many times, do not consume the blood. Make sure the animal is completely drained of blood, and when you cook the meat, make sure that the blood is not in the meat. In Genesis 9:4, on our topic of do not consume blood, but you must not eat meat with its life blood still in it. Deuteronomy 12:16, but you must not eat the blood, pour it on the ground like water. Deuteronomy 12:23, but be sure you do not eat the blood, because the blood is the life, and you must not eat the life with the meat. Leviticus 7:26, you must not eat the blood of any bird or animal in any of your dwellings. So it's a very big deal. When something's repeated even twice in the Bible, it's a big deal. When it's repeated this many times, it's extremely important. 1 Samuel 14:33, then someone reported to Saul, look, the troops are sinning against the Lord by eating meat with blood still in it. You have broken faith, said Saul. Roll a large stone over here at once. What happened in here was they crushed them with a rock. Why did they do it? Because they believed that the life, the spirit of the animal was in the blood. And of course, if you read very thoroughly into books outside of the Bible, you will find that evil spirits took the form of different animals. And that's why you see in other cultures, you'll find that people would do these rituals where they would, like for example, a witch, they have a familiar like a cat. they would say that there'd be these evil spirits that would occupy the bodies of these animals. And so the reason why they had to kill these troops was because once these troops had consumed the blood, they felt they would change in their behavior, because spirits affect your behavior. Ezekiel 33:25. Therefore tell them, this is what the Lord God says, you eat meat with the blood in it, lift up your eyes to your idols and shed blood. Should you then possess the land? So when you start reading about what some of the other cultures were doing, the people that were prone to eating blood, drinking blood, or doing these different rituals with blood, eventually they lost their minds. They got prion-like diseases. That's what we would call them today. Rabies, for example. These different diseases people would get from consuming blood led them to be extremely violent. And we saw in the Bible they would kill their children, and we've proven historically the Romans, the Phoenicians, the Greeks, and people that did this, they did slaughter their children. So over time, it appears that people, when they consume blood, the parasites that enter their body start to cause them to lose their mind. Acts 15:20. Instead, we should write and tell them to abstain from food polluted by idols, and from sexual immorality, and from meat of strangled animals and the blood. Why meat of strangled animals? When you strangle an animal, what ends up happening is the animal is obviously very scared. It goes into a fearful state. When you kill an animal in a fearful state, it's releasing a whole bunch of adrenaline. It's called adrenochrome. If some of you have studied about adrenochrome, you'll know that there are people out there that torture individuals, and they collect the blood and then they drink it for a type of a high. This is exactly what it's talking about. And it says, and from blood. CDC, some parasites spend most or all of their life cycle in the bloodstream, such as, and I'm not going to probably pronounce these properly, Babesia and Plasmodium species. Parasites such as Trypanosoma cruzi might be found in the blood early in an infection, the acute phase, and at much lower levels, the chronic phase of infection. So here's one reason why you might not want to consume blood. There's parasites that are in the blood, and of course, as too many parasites develop inside of your stomach will hold a lot of them for a long time. It can do a whole bunch of adverse things to your health. Candida is an example. The more candida you have in your bloodstream, the more poor your health can be. This can do everything from causing skin conditions, it can cause back pain. A lot of people have become aware of candida in the last 20 years.
That at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow.